Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I'm going to be showing all of you how I create my thumbnails for videos inside of GIMP for free. So assuming you already have GIMP installed and opened up, the first thing we're going to do is to go up to the File menu, go to New, and choose the image size for our document. Now usually I'm going to use 1920 by 1080 resolution, but it might be worth considering shrinking it down to 1280 by 720 resolution. Now, I think this was more of a in the past thing, but if you export your image to PNG and it is in a high resolution, then in the past, the YouTube video editor would say that the thumbnail size is too big, so that might be one reason to shrink it down. Either way, it should be plenty big enough for your thumbnails. The important thing is to keep it 16 width by 9 height ratio. So we'll do 1920 by 1080 for this tutorial, so I'll go ahead and click OK. And we'll either have a transparent or filled in color background. It doesn't really matter much for right now. So when it comes to choosing the background part of our thumbnail, I have two ways of really going about doing it. One is to take a snapshot from our actual edited video and use that as the base background. And then the other way would be that I would try to find a stock image that kind of matches the video topic, but is maybe a little bit more interesting visually. So if you want to find a stock image that you could use as a background, a really great place to find that would be pixabay.com. A really great place to find that would be pixabay.com. Another good option is pexels.com. On either site, a lot of the stock content that people provide is quite high quality, so it can work pretty good. Now, as for the other option of grabbing a snapshot from your video and using that as the background, I'll use this stock clip in order to demonstrate that. So in this case, I'll show you how to do that using VLC Media Player, which is generally what I use. So I'll right click on this and go to Open with VLC. There would be a similar function in Windows, of course, if you right click. And let's give it permission to access the desktop just so that I can play the video. So this stock clip would demonstrate what could be a good looking background for a thumbnail, because visually there's a lot going on. It's very interesting. And when we add some text on top of this, it's going to kind of capture the potential viewer's attention pretty well. So what you got to do with your video is find where something interesting is happening, and then we'll take a screenshot of that. So I think when it's close to the end here, it's a little too hazy, so I'd probably rather it be right about there, where there's still this black in the background, and you can still clearly see all of this purple smoke. I think that's really cool. So I'll go with that. So if we go up to video, and then we do snapshot here, or you can use the key combination to do the same thing. We'll snapshot that. So when you take your snapshot, it should pop up and say where on your computer it's saving the image. So I'm going to take this snapshot we did, and I'm going to bring that into GIMP. Let's open up the GIMP window again. I'll kind of shrink it so that we can see both the Finder or Windows Explorer and GIMP itself. And now we're just going to drag this straight onto our document. Of course, if you downloaded a stock image that you want to use for your background, it's kind of the same. So let's fully maximize GIMP again. Okay, so now we're going to want to center this in the document. And one way to make sure it's perfectly centered would be to set up a couple of 50% centered horizontally and vertical guides. So let's go up to the image menu and do guides, new guide by percent, and just hit OK for horizontal 50%. And then go up to image, guides, new guides by percent, and change this dropdown to vertical and hit OK. And now there's two guides, one that's centered vertically and one that's centered horizontally. So if I left click on our top layer, the VLC snap, with the move tool, which is top left over here, or M on the keyboard, then we can just snap it to these guidelines, and we want it to snap right there in the center. So we're sure now that it's perfectly centered, and that's going to be what we want. Now we're going to want to add some text to our document. So I'm going to hit T to switch to the move tool, or you can click up here in the toolbox. I'm going to swap the foreground color and the background with X. So that's going to make my foreground white. If you need to manually select white, you can click on the foreground color and you can just go to the top left-hand corner here, or you can make the HTML notation, all Fs. That's just white in HTML. Click OK. Next, with this text tool, we need to choose a font and a size in the tool options. As you can see, when I do my thumbnails, especially as of late, I tend to use very large font sizes, once again, because it grabs people's attention. So for the font choice, you can click here on this dropdown and select any that are installed on your computer. But I specifically like to go for fonts that are very big and then condensed from left to right so that you can fit more text on your image while still making it very big vertically. So Babus Noe is a good font for that, and you can get this on dafont.com/babus-noe.font. And as you can see, this is public domain, so it's completely free. In this font, looking at it, it's very big, it's bold, it's clear, and you can fit a lot of text from left to right. So that's what I'm looking for in a font, but you can use any font you want. So I'm going to click on here on the document to start typing. You'll see these 4 corners, and those corners will stretch as soon as we start typing. So when you're picking the text that you want to put onto your thumbnail, remember that when people are looking at it, when they're browsing YouTube, it's going to be shrunk down a lot. So we want to use just a few words that are good keywords for our video. So this video is probably going to be called something like how to make YouTube thumbnails in GIMP. So the important part there is the YouTube thumbnails. So let's start by typing YouTube and thumbnails. Now, as you can see, the text is maybe a little too big for all of that. So I'm going to click in here. I'm going to do a Command or Control A to select all of the characters all at once. You can also left click and then drag left to right if you want to do it that way. So get all your characters selected, and then we can change the font size. So I want everything to be on one line here. So let's make it 300, and we'll see if we can fit it left to right. So I can just drag this and have it snap to that center guideline that we made before. And it's still a little too big. So one option is that you can move half of this onto another line. Personally, I like to keep the center area, which is usually where stuff is going to be happening in the background, clear. So I'll put my text either on top or bottom. So I think in this case, I would not want to block this purple smoke. So I'm actually going to just shrink the text down a little bit further. So let's select it again. And I think we're really looking for something like 230 font size. And then I'll center that again. And we have a little extra room. So there's no real reason not to just bump it up a little more. So let's increase this. I'll select all of the text and let's just increment it until it kind of fits the bounds. So 250, I think that'll be probably good. Because in my case, I would want to put either a shadowy vignette on the edges or possibly a colored border that strokes around the outside of the image. So I do need to leave a little bit of space there to account for that. So now down here at the bottom, we may want to specify what program we're using in this case, because it's a tutorial about using GIMP to make YouTube thumbnails. So it makes sense to add some extra text down there. So I'll use the text tool. Let's add it down there. And I'm going to change the font size in advance to probably more like 400. And then let's type in GIMP. Okay, now I'll use the move tool and I'll position it right about there. I think I do want this YouTube thumbnails to go up a little bit as well. Keeping it centered there is kind of important so it looks good. So because I'm generally talking about specific software, I have a folder where I keep logos corresponding to that software, and I can just drag these images to layer on top of our background. So this is a GIMP video. So I'm going to take the GIMP logo and pop it in here. And just by dragging and dropping it, we have the image layered on top of everything. Now, you'll notice that this image doesn't block the background where the GIMP logo is not located, and that's because this is a PNG image. So if in your thumbnail you want there to be something that needs to stand on top, then you should make sure that that is in a PNG format before you bring it in, so that it can have the transparency and still let the background show. Now this logo is obviously too big, so I'm going to hit Shift and S to go into the scale mode tool. It's also located up here if you right click on the drop down and select scale. And I'm going to make sure in this tool that we have interpolation set to either linear or cubic so that when I shrink this down, it'll still look good. So let's go up to this width for the scale, and I'm going to divide this by 3. So I'm going to put / for division, 3, and then I'm going to hit Tab to switch to the next thing over here, which will automatically make the calculation happen. And now we can see a preview of the updated image size. Now, we could make that a little bit bigger, but I think it'll be okay for now. Actually, let's make it 600. So I'm going to take the width and change it to 600, hit Tab, and it'll update here. And you'll notice the width and the height automatically update to keep the same ratio with each other. That's what this link over here does. So if you uncheck the link, then the width and height will no longer forcibly stay in the same ratio. But you do want them to keep the same ratio, so the logo still looks correct. Now let's hit Scale. And we have our updated logo there. Note, due to the interpolation, which we can zoom in with either Control or Command and middle mouse wheel in, that the edges here are going to look smooth. Overall, the logo still looks good because the interpolation tries to keep it looking like the original, even though it's a scaled down size. So let's hit M to go into Move tool and move this logo to probably the bottom left-hand corner in this part. In this case, putting your main subject in the center would also be potentially a possibility, but in this case, I'm going to put it in the bottom left-hand corner because I don't want it to be that eye-catching. So let's hit Command and scroll out a little bit with middle mouse wheel, Control if you're on Windows or Linux. And now I'm thinking that the bottom is still a little bit barren. So I think we have the space to add GIMP tutorial instead of just GIMP. So I'm going to move the logo further to the bottom left. I'm going to move this text over to here. And then let's go into the text tool. And I'm going to left click on that old text. So note that that will automatically switch to the already existing text layer. And let's add tutorial here. But now the text is too large here. And also I don't want to de-emphasize the fact that this is about making YouTube thumbnails. So let's select all the text and shrink it, possibly to something like 300. Now let's go smaller than that. Let's make it 250, just like up there above. And now move tool, move it kind of down here, just kind of position everything so that it looks good. One thing you can do if you do want to be able to move the logo and this text as one thing is you can create a folder in the layers window. So I'm going to click on create new layer group, and then I'm going to drag both the GIMP tutorial text and the GIMP logo into here. So now if you click on the layer group and you're holding shift down to move the active layer with the move tool, and we click in here, you can see that this will move everything at once because the active layer is this layer group. So if you want to just only move one at a time, you can click on logo GIMP, hold shift to specifically move the active layer no matter what, and then move this around the screen. So let's just get the text a little bit more like where we want it. And at this point, I probably would add drop shadow to the text to make it stand out a little bit more. You can see in areas like over here where the pink is already pretty bright, that the white and the pink don't mesh that well with each other. So in cases like these, you may want drop shadow. Another option would be to darken the background. So I'll show how to darken the background and then we'll show drop shadow. So if you want to darken the background, then you want to create a new layer, and let's actually choose fill with and then background color. So that's going to choose this black that's existing over here and then click OK. So now this new layer we created, I'm going to drag this to right above the background. So now you can't see anything below the border layer. And then you can take the opacity and lower it down. That'll make it partially transparent so that you can still see the background, but this black layer is darkening everything that's on the background layer. So now you can go from 0% if you want to completely ignore this layer to 100% if you want to completely hide the background snapshot. So we could do that, but in this case, I think I'm just going to stick to drop shadow. So I'm going to make this layer 0% and ignore it for now. And then I'm going to click on YouTube thumbnails. I'm going to go up to filters, light and shadow, and then drop shadow. So if you look closely, and we could do that with zooming in, so Command or Control and zoom in a little bit. If I disable the preview, you may be able to see on the screen how it kind of darkens the background a little bit, but I want to go more than that. I want it to be very visible drop shadow, which is what I usually do. So I'm going to take the opacity and make it way up. Let's just take it to something like 1.5 there. And you'll notice also that the offset of the text compared to the original text is pretty far. So I'm going to bring it in. Let's make it something like X of 10 and Y of 10, just dragging that. You can also take the blur radius and make it 0 if you want the shadow to be perfectly visible as a silhouette of the base text. If you have blur, it's going to be a little bit harder to see clearly. I usually have the blur radius at 0. And once it's there, I could even argue maybe the drop shadow should be brought in a little bit more. So I will make X and Y 8, and let's click OK. So as you can see, it makes it easier to read this text compared to this GIMP tutorial down here that has no drop shadow. So let's click on GIMP tutorial now and repeat the drop shadow. The quickest way to do that is just going to be to go to filters and hit repeat drop shadow. So we don't need to put in the settings again. It's just going to keep it exactly how it was before. Now, when you do add drop shadow, it's going to slightly change the center position of your text, because over here on the right, it's going to have to expand the text area a little bit. So click M to go to Move Tool, and then click on the top area, and then make sure that snaps back into the center once again. This text at the bottom, it wasn't really centered to begin with, so just position it and make it look good where you want it to be. You can also add drop shadow to PNG images. So with our layer GIMP logo, let's move it up here just a bit, and I'm going to go to filters and repeat drop shadow as well. If you like the look of that, then you can keep that. Kind of makes it more consistent with the text that's on our image. Now the last thing we need to do is going to be to either create a vignette to darken the edges of our image, or we can add a border around the edge of our image. And both of those can kind of help center our focus onto the thumbnail when people are considering whether they want to click on the video and watch it. So to create a vignette, you should create a new layer. So click on new layer in the bottom right. I'm going to rename it to vignette, and I'm going to fill with transparency and click OK. So this layer, we only want it to darken the background. We don't want it to darken the text at all. So I'm going to bring it probably down here below the border layer, which is currently invisible, but above the background image. Now we can go up to Filters, Light and Shadow, Vignette, and you'll immediately see the preview for this effect. These gizmos you can use to control the positioning and size of the vignette. And as you can see, everything that falls outside of this bounds ends up black, but I don't generally want it to be that extreme of an effect. So one option is to keep these bounds completely outside the edge of your image, and then you can move this inner softness line to control where is going to be affected by the vignette or where isn't. Another is that you can keep these extreme results where on the outside it's just black, and then you can shrink the opacity on your layer after you finish the effect. So I'm going to do it the first option, where we just keep these outer edges outside of the bounds of our image, and then we move the softness inner ring to determine where it gets darkened and where it doesn't. So I'll put it right around there. Just stretch and move things around until basically it looks good to you, and then go ahead and hit OK. And then that's our vignette layer. We can hide it and show it, and you can see the difference. When it's enabled, the center areas are going to look much brighter than our outer edges. So we can leave that, and you could also even combine this with the border effect if you want. And for right now, let's just create the border. I'm going to disable the vignette by hiding its visibility there. So let's add a new layer here. I'm going to fill it with transparency, and I will call it the border layer. Let's click OK. This, once again, should be above the background layer. So on the document, I'm going to click Command A to select everything here, or you can right click on your border layer and choose Alpha to Selection. As long as you made your border layer the size of your canvas, then this should be grabbing the outer edges here, or this yellow dashed line. So now we need to select a color for our border. So I'm going to click on Active Foreground Color, and then let's grab a rather bright color. So when I'm thinking colors for a border, I'm thinking more in this top right hand area where it's very bright but also a very saturated color. So you could select something like a light blue, a deep blue. Reds can also work very well. Or you can select a border color that matches your thumbnail background pretty well as well. So we could consider something like a deep purple if we wanted to. So I'll try a red that's slightly shifted towards purple over here. Let's grab this in the top right, position it right around there, hit OK. So now we want the border to go around the edge of our canvas here. So that a really easy way to do that is going to be to go to the Select menu and choose Select All. And now we can go to the Edit menu, and you should see Stroke Selection as an option here. So with this stroke selection, I'm going to leave it as a pretty high number here. By default, it's like 6 pixels. So you're going to want to change that to probably something more like 60 or 80 so that the border can actually be visible. And the stroke line, you want that set to solid color, which is going to be using your foreground color, which we just selected. So now you can just use stroke here, and it'll create your border. Now, if you don't like the color of your border, you can hit Control Z or Command Z on Mac, and then change your active foreground color to something else. So we could try with a yellow if we wanted to. Hit OK, and then go back to Edit, Stroke Selection, and click Stroke. And you can kind of just keep playing around with it and try and see what color would work best for your border. Kind of balancing catching people's attention while also trying not to be too annoying with the colors. So I'm going to do Control Z, and I think I'll go back to that kind of reddish purple because I did like that overall. Okay, I'll click OK. Let's do Edit Stroke Selection, click Stroke, and there we go. That's pretty much my process for how I currently create thumbnails. The important elements are having a good snapshot for your background image. It should be one of the most visually appealing parts of your video that you use as your base. For your text, you want it to be large text, generally, and you want to focus on the keywords. Don't try to put full sentences there. And I like to keep it out of the center because the center is kind of more meant to show what the video is about. So if you're going to have text, have it kind of on the bounds. You can bring in other images you want to layer on top, but once again, they should be brought in as PNGs so they maintain that transparency. And once again, you can still see the background image. And if you want, you can add a vignette or a border effect to kind of help bring people's attention into your video. And you can also try it with both. So here we have the vignette and the border, but I think having it brighter without the vignette is actually going to be a little bit better in this case. So I'm going to turn the vignette off, and this is what I'm going to be exporting for this video's thumbnail. One last thing you could note here is that sometimes you could even have part of your document go a little bit over the border. So it just kind of worked out that this GIMP logo has the paintbrush kind of sticking out here over the edge. If you don't like that, you can just move the border to a higher layer like this, and that's going to make it take precedence in terms of the ordering. But if you do like it, just keep it below the rest of your document, and then you can have this kind of cool effect where the paintbrush kind of pops out of the image. Okay, now finally, before we wrap up the video, the last thing is going to be exporting the image. So first, make sure that you save your document as a GIMP document before we export. So let's go to File, Save As. I have this thumbnails folder, so I'm going to save it there. So we'll call it GIMP thumbnails tutorial.xcf. That's the GIMP format. Saving it in this format will allow you to go back into this and edit it just like you see here. So save that first. And then most likely you're going to want to export the image as either a PNG or you can export it as a JPEG. So if you want to reduce the file size, you should make it a JPG. Making it a PNG adds the transparency layer, but for this, when you're putting a thumbnail on YouTube, it's not needed. So making it PNG just increases the file size, and that could give you an error in the YouTube uploader. So making it .jpeg is generally going to be the way to go. So let's export it. There'll be this little pop-up menu. Keeping the defaults here, I've never had any problems with that. So let's just go ahead and export. And here we have the finished uploaded image. So when you are uploading your video on YouTube, there'll be that box to upload a custom image. Just select this and use that for your video. So that in a nutshell is pretty much how I create my thumbnails inside of GIMP. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I've been Chris, and hopefully I'll see you in my future video content.